everyone, my name's Andre, better known as HumaNature, and welcome to my masterclass for the 174 Production Marathon. So in this session, I will be breaking down my track Searching, which was released on Liquidity Records, a part of my Since I've Known You EP. So yeah, let's not waste any time here. Let's get right into it. Okay, so here we are inside my DAW. I am going to press play and let's have a listen to the track. Okay, so that is what the track sounds like. Now, let's dive in to each section. I'll break them down one by one, and I'm going to try to explain here how I created this track. So to begin, I think we should begin with the melodic elements, and I'll just show you really how this track came to life, what was the inspiration behind it, and just how it all started. So, okay, the track originally began with this melody. And let me actually play that without any processing on it. I can see where the channel is. Okay. So it originally sounds like this. Oops, that was the wrong channel. All right. And what this is from is Nexus. Actually, this was when I just got this plugin. A buddy of mine actually gave it to me, and I was going through the plugin, just seeing some sounds, and I found this patch called Classic Organ, and it just inspired me in the moment. So I just thought, hey, you know what? Why don't I try to make a melody or make something out of this? And this is what I came up with. Now, The melody itself was actually inspired by a track from Above and Beyond. They produce trance music, and I don't know what I was doing, but whatever. I was listening to that track, and I heard a melody, and I then created this melody inspired by that one. I just thought it was really catchy. And to make it a bit more interesting, I decided to layer it, and I layered it with this pluck. Now, the idea behind this was just to kind of have a layer just make it a bit more rolling, like just to push it and just to keep it interesting and just to keep it repeating. And the processing that I've done behind these sounds is actually pretty simple. It's just all based around delay. And so on the original melody itself, I've added a bit of wave shaper just to boost the harmonics a bit. I've added some delay, and I've set the delay to ping pong, and it's on a low pass. The delays are being low passed. So it creates this, delay echo effect. And then I've actually done the same with the layer. So the layer is actually delayed with ping pong, but this time on a high pass. So they're covering two different ranges of the spectrum. And together they sound like this. Now, once I created that melody, I then dove into the chord progression because I wanted to create some type of chords to match the melody. So I went back, and I was actually using Nexus for this whole project. That ended up happening because as I mentioned, I just installed Nexus on this day, and I was like, hey, let me try to make a tune using this plugin. It has some really cool patches, so let me just explore it and see what can come out of it. Now, this patch was called Cavernous Mod. Went with this pad. I thought it sounded very warm. And actually, this tune is titled Searching, but before it was titled Meditation, just because that's the whole vibe that it gave me. And I feel like all of the patches that I used in this track helped contribute to that, smooth, a meditation type vibe. So let's see what the pads sound like, and then I'll show you how I made it. So it's this 4-chord progression, and this is the MIDI behind it. It's actually very simple. These are all just octaves of the same note. So the progression goes D, A, F, G, and then they're just layered again in the octave form. And that layered with the melody, I felt like it sounded nice, so I just went with it. Let's see what that sounds like. Now, in addition to creating these chords, I've also put a filter on it. And these chords have, I believe it's a low pass. And the low pass is opening up over time. And the reason why I do this is because, I like to have movement in my sounds. If they're just static loops, they sound really boring. And just to even do a frequency sweep like this with the filter, it just helps add that movement, and it makes it sound more interesting. And another important thing that I want to mention is that when I'm building these ideas, I like to work in like an 8-bar, 16-bar loop, right? And what I'll do is I'll just start creating a stack of different sounds. And I'll stack the sounds with different melodies and leads and chords. And I'll basically try to create all the melodic elements in this one 16-bar loop. And I'll make sure that when they're all playing at the same time, that they're all harmonizing and they all work well together. So this leads into the next part of the idea generation on how I started creating the rest of the tune. So once I had my melody, I had the chord progression, I felt like I was happy with what I got out of the synth, and I thought, let me see what type of samples I can bring in here to complement what I've just created, the MIDI that I've written. And I went to Splice, right? I like to use Splice or LoopCloud. These are websites where there are literally infinite samples. There's millions of samples. They're uploading them every day. So I went into Splice and I found this sample that I then sliced up and I processed it a bit. And it sounds like this. Okay, it's these trancey type plucks. I've processed it with some EQing. Looks like I've rolled off the bottom end. I also have a filter, a low pass that's doing a frequency sweep on this sound as well. And I'm doing this just, again, to create movement so we don't have a static sound. And then I have some delay on it. Looks like it's also ping pong and it's high passed. And then it looks like I have another reverb and delay. And then I have a post EQ. Looks like, again, it's just rolling off some low end and it's boosting some highs. I guess once the filter opens up, probably gets a bit brighter just by the looks of it. It looks like I had a chorus, but I disabled that, so let's just ignore that. And yeah, this is just simply a sample that I found. I thought it sounded great with my other sounds, and it looks like I just sliced it and rearranged it in a way that works with the track. So let's see how it sounds with the melody and the chord progressions all together. Oops, let's play that back. So these trancey plucks with this delay, it made a nice layer on the pads. And as you see, I layered my melody plucks, and I've even layered my pad as well with these plucks delay sound. And you can really get so much more out of your sounds if you layer them, right? Using different instruments, playing the same thing to cover different parts of the spectrum. You can process them differently. It just makes your sound more full and interesting. So definitely experiment with layering your sounds. Now, once I reached this point, I started to bring in other elements to build the musical instruments even more. So I remember I ended up rendering out some type of pluck in Nexus, and I bounced that down, and then I just resampled it, added some EQing here, some wave shaper, and also some delay. Looks like it's also ping pong and it's a high pass. So this sound, now this is just a sound that's helping the chord progression. It's just the same note, just repeating, just helping push the key of the track. And also, it sounds like it's layering with this pluck down here as the pluck is opening up on a low pass. So again, I'm layering the delays. What it looks like to me right now is that in this moment that I was layering the delays of this pluck sound. Again, just adding more interest to the sound. And here I did a low pass on this pluck, again, so the sound is not static, so it has movement to it, and it just sounds more interesting. It looks like I also layered in this. Again, you can see I have a low pass filter opening up as the tune, as the sound goes on. Again, not letting it be static, creating more movement. And I believe this was just a sample that I found in Splice as well. And then I resampled it, I rearranged it, I made it sound the way that it is here. And let's listen to these melodies all together now, layered with our chords. So you can see how all of the sounds working together in the stack that I was talking about before, it all harmonizing well. It all sounds interesting. So I just continued, and I started to make different phrases, and I want to dedicate certain melodies and certain hooks to certain phrases, so I can create a progression throughout the tune and just have it always sound fresh and interesting. So I decided to add this a piano. This looks like it was a piano I found off of Splice. Originally, it sounds like this. Looks like I've also added some delay to it. And I've rolled off the bottom end. Now, I ended up using this piano, and I reversed it. Like, I sliced it, I resampled it, and I also reversed it, added some delay. And I wanted to use this kind of as a sound to give a progression to everything that's going on. So I'm just going to play here this phrase. Let's see how the reverse piano plays its part in the melody. And then I want you to listen to how I started using it more, and it makes the whole tune feel like it has this sense of progression to it. And now it's going to progress. So all the sounds work perfectly together. And yeah, as I said, just building that stack, making sure all the sounds harmonize. I'm doing filter sweeps to give it movement. I'm using a delay and reverb and EQing to smoothen things out. Let's see what other melodic sounds I have here. Okay, so also I found another sample. And this sample was a flute. Again, I felt like it gave this really meditative vibe, and it just fit the tune perfectly. So let's see what it sounds like on its own. Let me remove the effects. And I ended up processing it with an EQ. Looks like I rolled off the bottom end and boosted the top end a bit. I added a chorus. I added a delay. And I ended up slicing it up and only using specific parts of it in specific regions of my track. So I'll show you it in action with the rest of the melodies. And I'll show you how this was an additional instrument that just made the track that much more interesting. So I'll just play off here so we're not always listening to the same thing over. The delays play such an important role in this track. Now, in the arrangement, I put this sound here because it's at the end of this 16-bar loop, and this was a sound to kind of trigger that change is coming, and we're going into the next phrase. So there's a few times that happens, because actually on the second phrase, what I'm using to show that change is coming soon and we're about to progress is that the filters are opening up on all the sounds and it starts to get really busy. It's building this tension. And then on phrase 3, the tension is released because now I subtracted a lot of the sounds, right? I reset the filters on all of my other sounds, and then I brought in this new melody, okay? And we listened to this part earlier, so I won't play it, but we then break out into the 4th phrase, which actually has my favorite sample of the whole tune. And I'll just play it because I'll show you how the flute sample played its part into helping transition into the 4th phrase. And then we can listen to the new sample and I'll show you how I made that. So, all right, let's play from phrase 3 halfway through. Let's see how we transitioned into phrase 4. So this sample right here is actually a guitar loop. Again, it's something I pulled out of Splice. It was harmonizing with my tune, so I pulled it out. Let me remove all the post-processing, and let's see what it sounds like originally. So when I heard that sample, I was like, this sounds super chill. I think it fits the tune perfectly. Let's see how we can incorporate it and make it fit uniquely in the track. So I ended up slicing it, rearranging it, and repeating it in a specific way to create a melody, like a rhythmic melody. And what I also did to help give it more rhythm was I added this plugin called Filter Shaper. And I've just, I have this setting where it's basically has like a gate effect on it. So the volume's on, then off, then on, then off. And that helps create this rhythmic feeling to it. Also, I've EQ'd it. I've rolled off the low end. I've added another filter, a high pass, just to, give it movement as the phrase goes on. There's, the frequency is sweeping across the phrase. And then I have some reverb. And then it looks like I used gross beat, but I don't know what I used that on. I think in the end, I ended up not using it. So, okay, let's see what it sounds like now with the Filter Shaper plugin and all the other processing that I did. So it creates this type of rhythmic, melodic sound, and yeah, I thought it fits absolutely perfect with the rest of the track, and gave it a really nice effect. So that's it for the musical side of searching. Let's carry on and have a look at the drums and see how I created that. So let me just unmute all of the drum tracks. And we can see what they sound like as a whole. And then we can go back and listen to them one by one. So I'll just play here as it seems to be a busy part with all the drums playing. Let's have a listen and see what it sounds like. Okay, so Something important that I want you to know about how I create my drums is I always want to feel some sense of progression every 8 bars. So as you're listening, it feels like the drums, and that helps the tune overall feel like it's always changing, always progressing, which that leads back to what I was saying about the musical elements, how I like to have of filters and different types of effects always moving with automation. So it just helps add that movement and just always makes the track feel fresh to your ears. So with the drums, how I do this is basically you can see like every 8 bars. Okay, if this is a phrase, 16 bars, what you can see is 8 bars is like this, and then the other 8 bars has these hi-hats as a progression. Then it breaks off into the next phrase, where again, it's similar. The first 8 bars are without the hi-hat progression. The second 8 bars have the hi-hat progression, but overall, we have new tops also layered in. So we can see, one phrase compared with the other, they have this in common, but this phrase doesn't have the progression tops, and this phrase does have the progression tops. So we then move on to the next segment where we then have, looks like similar. It repeats, but here it looks like we have a new drum sound. And then we break off into the next phrases where we have these new shakers. And then, yeah, it's always kind of like, back and forth, and new elements are coming in and out as the phrases go. And this is a way to give your drums this effect where, it's always progressing and it never really sounds the same. There's always subtle differences. But let's take a zoom in. Let's see each layer on its own, and let's see what that sounds like. So starting off the top here, I believe we have the kick. And this is just a kick sample. I think actually this came from a plugin called Kick 2. This is just a sound that I've made in the past, and I rendered it down and I pull it out of my sample pack. And the processing behind it is actually we just have trash 2. Looks like there's just some tape saturation on it. Nothing crazy. Now, if you pay attention to how I programmed the kick and the snare, I created this unique drum pattern to match the overall vibe of the tune. But I'll get into the drum programming in just a moment. I want to go through and look through all the sounds itself. So this is a snare. I think this was also made in Kick 2 synth. I've just rendered it down, and I've actually just tightened up the sound itself. So I made it shorter, so it sounds like really small, kind of like a rim shot. And then we have different drum loops that I added. So now this is a drum loop that I got. Could have been from a different sample pack or maybe something I've made in the past. At this point, I have no idea. But it's a drum loop that I had here, and I'm using it. Now, what I do see, though, is that I've sliced it up. So this means that I purposely created this drum programming that, gives this feel to it. Right, so it's not your traditional drum and bass pattern. The kick and the snare, they're programmed in a different way. So it looks like I just went through adding in more layers. This looks like it was like a shuffle and hi-hats and a snare layer. Here's another one of my signature loops that I've been using a lot. So there's some hi-hats. Some more shuffles and snare. And some more tops. Now, the second half of the phrase, I've layered in this hat and more hi-hats. So that's just to give the sense of the progression. So also I have this crash cymbal here. So let's see how this all sounds together. And then comes the progression. So I've just noticed that I've created like these transitions at the end of the 8 and 16 bars where I added extra snares at a different pitch. Just to create some kind of drum fill to help progress into the next phrase, right? So it's important that I mention that even with the musical instruments and the drums, everything is bussed into the mixer. I have all my musical instruments bussed into like a music bus. I have all my drums bussed into a drums bus, and I've manually gain staged, like I've done the balancing of all the sounds individually so they all fit overall as a group nicely. You know, I have some very minor processing here. It looks like I have a transient master just to edit the transients a bit of the overall drums. And then it looks like I have some more saturation on the drums bus. And then I have a low pass filter that I'm using, you know, you can see up here, I'm just shaping some of the phrases to help build transition in the tune. Now, on the individual drum hits, it looks like I have some processing as well. But very minimal processing. And this is because either I've used these sounds before and I've previously processed them before and I'm just pulling them out of old projects. Or simply because it's just a really high quality sample that doesn't need much processing to it. Okay. So if I've processed it before and I'm reusing it, that's one thing. But you know, a lot of times, you don't want to destroy a sound by over processing it or doing something that's unnecessary. Like you don't want to just process your sound just because, right? Any type of EQing or compression or anything you do to your sounds, there has to be a specific reason behind it. And also something really important, actually it was Current Value, Tim Current Value. He mentioned this and it stuck with me. And it was, you know, there's something about the virginity of your sounds. The more that you process it, the more that you're changing the frequencies, the phasing of the sounds, and just the more that you're taking it further away from its virgin state. So, you know, I like to just work with really high quality sounds and just try to, you know, not destroy them. So there's minimal processing done on here. So yeah, let's just go through the rest of the sounds. I've just layered in more tops. Let's check these. Seems like I have here shaker. This is some more tops. Another shaker. And looks like more hats. So it's just really just a combination of strategically choosing the right sounds and program them in the right way to give them the vibe that it does here. So yeah, I'm just going to play them all together one more time. And also I want to talk about the balancing, again, the gain staging of the drums. You can see here on all the different channels how they're all different levels. And this is because, again, I've strategically balanced the sounds to give the dynamic that I wanted. So, you know, I have the kick and the snare a bit louder, and then I have all the other tops just kind of just fitting around my drums. So yeah, you know, that is pretty much how I layered up these drums. So let me go to the next part of the track, which is the bass. Okay, so the bass in this track is actually very simple. It's just revolved around a sub bass, which is just a pure sine wave, and then a mid bass, which is a Reese that I've high passed and I've layered it with the sub bass. So let's open up the sub bass. Well, first let's have a listen to it. Let's check out the MIDI, and then I'll open up the synths and I'll show you how it was done. So it starts with the sub drop before, then it drops into the bass line. And I'll just play it all together with the whole track just so you can see how the bass fits with the rest of the tune. So in terms of the programming of the MIDI notes of the bass, I had it follow the main chord progression, but then you can see I even added this high bass note here to accent this reverse piano to help push it into the second half of the first phrase. And also this reverse piano in this high bass note and these effects here, you know, and the snare fill edit. This also helps, you know, introduce the progression of the drums that also help progress, you know, the phrase. So it's like every 8 bars, there's things happening that's signaling change in the track, and it just always makes the tune feel fresh and dynamic, right? It doesn't just feel like loops just repeating all the time. So let's dive into the bass, and I'll show you how I made the sine wave. Sorry, the sub bass, which is this one. Now, this sub bass was made with, well, before I show you how it's made, let me show you the MIDI notes, okay? So the MIDI notes, if you want to just pause this video and have a look at it, these are the MIDI notes behind it. Now, I've just used the 3x oscillator. This is a default synth with FL Studio. I just use it just to generate a sine wave. And that's pretty much it. I just get a pure sine wave. I play it at the lowest octave in the sub frequency range. And then I just added some effects to it. So it looks like I added a wave shaper just to boost the harmonics in the sound. And then I've added a Pro Q to remove those upper harmonics, but just to keep those lower harmonics that I boosted. So we're just making a really fat sub by boosting the harmonics. But as we boost the harmonics, we're also adding high frequencies. So I use a basically a low pass. I use the EQ to create a low pass, and I'm removing all those upper harmonics just to isolate those bottom frequencies, because the top frequencies that I'm going to add is going to be the Reese layer. Okay, so I have a limiter here just to catch everything above 0 so the sub doesn't peak, because I really boosted those harmonics. So let's have a look at the Reese layer. Now this Reese layer, I've actually used an EQ, and I've removed those bottom sub frequencies. So I'm using these upper harmonics of the Reese, layering that with the bottom frequencies of the sub, and it creates my bass. It looks like I've processed my Reese with some tape saturation on trash 2. And also I have routed the sub and the Reese to a bass bus, and I've put a limiter on that bass bus with a sidechain signal coming from the kick. So every time my kick hits, it makes my bass duck. So when the kick hits, the bass ducks, and it comes back right away. And what that's really doing is that's making a sidechain to use in a mixing context, so the sub frequencies of my kick don't interfere with the frequencies of the bass. Okay, pretty standard stuff here. So the sub and the mid layered together, which sounds like a full bass. Okay, so how is that mid made? Now this mid bass was actually pulled from Omnisphere. Okay, this is a great synth. Again, has so many good presets. And I mean, you know, I'll use Serum or Vital to make bass, but I found this patch on Omnisphere that just has such a great stereo effect on the bass itself. So I thought that it just feels very warm, and this bass patch just fit perfectly on this track. So I've actually modified it a bit. I have changed the filter envelope on oscillators A and B, because normally it has like this it had this effect where it creates like this attack, and I just removed all of that just to have a a consistent Reese, right? Just a Reese patch. I've high passed it. I've layered it in with the sub. Super simple stuff. Honestly, this whole track is very simple. And I think that's why it works, just because it's so simple. So also we have this sub drop. And this was a sample. Originally it was much bigger, but I just did a volume fade here. And I mean, it's just like an 808, right? So if you know how to design an 808, it's just like a sine wave with a very short attack and a long decay, or you know, like a long release, with a pitch modulation, you know, going from high to low. And it's just a standard 808, but there's a transient in the very beginning. So that transient could also be made by, like, if you're using Serum, you could open up another envelope and you can do a pitch modulation on a sine wave. Very short attack and very short release to create kind of like a kick transient and layer that into the 808, and you get this more of an impactful 808 sub drop. And I've done that just before the drop, just to introduce some bass. So when the drop hits and the bass hits, yeah, it just gave a cool effect. And the bass line is just the same, always repeating. I mean, it's so simple, right? We just have a lot. I would say the musical instruments and the melodic elements it's what's a bit more complex in this tune, always changing. That's what really does the magic here. So, yeah, that is how I made the bass. Let's dive in and look at the last part, which is the effects. So the effects here are really simple. I pulled some effects that I've made in a previous tune. Actually, this is one of my tracks released years ago. I think like 2015, 2014, 2016. I don't know. It was in that time. It was one of my tracks called One More Time. It was on my Bring It Back EP on Focus Recordings. And I pulled out the effects rack out of there. It's just some white noise sweeps and reverse crash. And I've just pulled it into this track, and I've layered in some other effects. Again, just some white noise effects samples. I have this sound. I felt like it just layered really nicely with the drums as I did the edit. Like, I'll show you how that effects plays a part in the tune overall. So pay attention to that sound and listen to how it layers in with the tune. Very subtle, but it matches the rhythm of the drums, and on this snare fill, it helps just create this extra effect to make the drums a bit more interesting. And then we have the last effect sound that I used, which is just some type of impact, so when it hits the breakdown, so yeah, that is how I created Searching in a nutshell. I mean, I could have went a lot deeper into this, but I think I was able to generally cover it and explain how it was made without getting too deep on each aspect of the track. So yeah, that is a track breakdown. Thank you so much for joining me here on the 174 Production Marathon. This was my track Searching from my Since I've Known You EP on Liquicity. So yeah, I hope you got something out of this track breakdown. And thank you so much for being here. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And take care. Peace.
Hi, I'm Icicle and welcome to my studio. I'm a drum and bass producer from Holland, if you didn't know. I used to live in England for a long time, and together with Drum and Bass Academy I have made a course describing my entire process. It's an Ableton course over 4 hours long in which I go through drum design, drum programming, sound design, bass lines, composition and arrangement, some advanced sound design techniques as well, and mastering. Included are the project files as well, samples, presets, everything, so you can properly follow along with me and get to the same result as myself. So I hope you enjoy.